So do you believe in a historical person like some leader, Moses?
Yes, it could be. Yes.
Okay.
I would not turn it down.
Another question, does the most Egyptologists believe in some form of historical exodus, like you?
I think so, yes, of course.
Hello everybody, welcome to NT Podcast. My name is Nemanja Jurišić and today we are very honored to have Professor Dr. Manfred Bietak. Dr. Bietak, how are you?
Thank you, fine.
Professor Bietak championed the study of Egyptian archaeology and Egypt. He is Professor Emeritus of Egyptology at the University of Vienna. He is best known as the director of Austrian excavation at two sites in the Nile Delta, Tel al-Daba, which was identified as the location of Avaris, the capital of Hyksos period, and Rameses, which was the capital of the 19th dynasty of Egypt. Dr. Bietak is the founder and the director of the Austrian Archaeological Institute in Cairo, 1973 to 2009. He was chairman of Institute of Egyptology, 1984 to 2009, and of the Vienna Institute of Archaeological Science from 2004 to 2011. At the University of Vienna and chairman of the Commission for Egypt and the Levant at the Austrian Academy of Sciences. Additionally, he has supervised and reviewed at least 40 PhD dissertations and at least 18 master's theses. He also published more than 20 self-authored or edited monographs and close to 200 articles. Am I correct?
Yeah, nearly, yes.
Okay, nice. Today we are going to hear something about the Exodus. I believe in Exodus and Bible, so I want to hear what real archaeologists say about that. So thank you, Bietak, for that, and you can start.
Yeah, hello, dear colleagues in Serbia.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to introduce you to the research in trying to find a historical scenario for the Exodus and also a geographical scenario of the Exodus. I dealt with it from time to time. I wrote my Habiru dissertation on the geography of the Eastern Delta and used this knowledge to dig into the story of the Exodus, which, as you know, there are people who were scholars who refute that there was a historical Exodus. And of course, there are other people, other scholars who believe in the historicity of the Exodus. Now, here, please, what I have to contribute to that, I would like to add that I'm not a scholar of Ancient Testament. I'm an Egyptologist and Near Eastern archaeologist, and I dealt with historical geography, and it is from that angle that I try to introduce you to this subject. Well, let us first go to Upper Egypt, to Luxor, to Thebes, Western Thebes. Everybody perhaps knows Medinet Habu, the enormous temple of Rameses III, which was constructed just south of the temple of Aya and Horemheb. And it is within the temple of Aya and Horemheb that the University of Chicago, between the two wars, found a very interesting building without knowing what they have found. Anyway, it is at the northern edge of this precinct of the temple of Aya and Horemheb. They found a so-called four-room house, dating probably to the time of Rameses IV, which is early in the 12th century BCE. what is a forum house? A forum house is considered by Israeli archaeologists as the prototypical house of the Israelites. It is the typical house from the beginning of the Iron Age 1 until the end of the divided kingdom at the beginning of the exile period. I myself wonder if this house is really constructed and was developed only by the Proto-Israelites, probably also by tribes which were related to them, but at that time, in the time of Rameses IV, I think the ethnogenesis of the Israelites has not yet been terminated, and there were still a series of tribes roaming around, and from which pool later the Israelites originated. Well, the earliest forum houses appeared at Tel Batash in Israel, which is also called Timna, known as Timna, a site excavated by Amichai Mazar from the Hebrew University. But then also it's from the transition of the late Bronze Age to the early Iron Age 1. From the same time, a forum house was founded in Jordan, just south of Amman, at Tel el-Umeiri, and also in Wadi el-Lahun. Also everything very early in the time of the beginning of the Iron Age. Well, to cut it short, I personally think the Exodus and the emergence of the Proto-Israelites cannot be dated before the very late Bronze Age. Let us say late in the 13th century and at the beginning of the Iron Age, around 1200 BC, not before. And you may know there are many theories about Exodus in the time of Ramses II, or even much before, in the time of Ahmose, or even in the Middle Kingdom. All this is nonsense and is not possible to argue, because any archaeological remains which can be tied to the emergence of the Proto-Israelites only date from the beginning of the end of the late Bronze Age at the beginning of the Iron Age. Well, this is from Timna. You see, via forum house, you have a three-aisled main part of a building and a kind of broad room at one end. There are some variations, of course. Here you have also the entrance is protected with a kind of L-shaped wall. This is a reconstruction of this house. It is considered that the middle part was an open courtyard. Typically are also the columns, and as you will see later, columns only on one side. Well, this is Tel el-Umeiri in the Madaba plain, just south of Amman. You see the same kind of plan. You have a broad room at the end and a three-aisled part of the main building, and also here a protection of the entrance by an L-shaped wall. Well, this is another one from El Lahun with a reconstruction. This is a prototypical four-room house, also here in Tel Mazos in the Negev, excavated by late Aharon Kempinski. You see different variations of this, especially here, the variation with only one aisle with columns or with pillars, the other one firmly walled. This is Iron Age 1. It is a real prototypical type of house And now, how did this type of house come to Western Thebes? We have to try to find an explanation for it. And the explanation is that Rameses III, he is his statue found at Beit Shan in the Jordan Valley. Rameses III made a raid through the desert of Zaire, and he captured numerous Shosu beduins. The Shosu can be considered as a group of tribes which were a constant annoyance of the Egyptians from the time of the 18th dynasty onwards. Amenhotep II, the son and follower of Thutmose III, captured numerous of these Shosu Bedouins. And our theory is that among the Shosu Bedouins was also a tribe which constituted the core of the later Proto-Israelites. Anyway, he made a raid to the desert of Zaire, which is practically identical with the mountains of Edom. Edom means red, the mountains are red, and he took many Shosu back to Egypt. And I think the builders of this forum house in the precinct of Aya and Horemheb were captured Shosu Bedouins, which were distributed among the temples all over Egypt. And their task was to pull down the temple of Aya and Horemheb and to build a new temple of Ramses IV. So the date is early in the 12th century, first part of the 12th century BC, of this forum house found by the University of Chicago without identifying it, but explaining it correctly as a shelter for workmen who had to pull down the temple of Aya and Horemheb and to build a new temple for Ramses IV. Anyway, now let us go to the northern part of Egypt. We know that the children of Israel, according to the Bible, had to do forced labor in the towns of Ramses and Pithom, or Pithom and Ramses. It's mentioned in this way. Today, for a long time, we couldn't identify it, and until recently, Pithom was thought to be Tel el Maschuta at the eastern edge of the Wadi Tumilat, which connects the Nile Delta with the northern Sinai or with the more central Sinai. And also the town of Ramses. There was a big debate, where is Ramses? Gardiner thought it is at Pelusium, or Piemonte thought it is in Tanis, because in Tanis, as you will see, there are many monuments originating from the Ramses town, which were shipped there much later, and I will explain you why. Anyway, these two towns can be, in our days, identified beyond any doubt. And we have now already two biblical toponyms, firm biblical toponyms, which help us to reconstruct the whole story of the Exodus. Well, this is the Wadi Tumilat. You see today it is enclosed by attempts of the Egyptian government to increase agricultural land, but and in the time of Napoleon's expedition to Egypt, 1799 to 1802, the French engineers surveyed very accurately the Wadi Tumilat, and they also found vestiges of the ancient canal linking the delta system with the Gulf of Suez, the so-called Canal of Necho and Darius, and later the canal was always sanded up, and then it was spaled out, dredged out again in the Roman time, in the Ptolemaic times, in the Roman times, and also in medieval times. It was known as the Khalij al-Amir al-Mu'minin, the canal of the ruler of the Fidels, and this who was, of course, the Khalifa in Baghdad. Anyway, this is the most important place. And in my geographical studies, I was able to reconstruct the historical model of this place. The western part was covered by an enormous lake, 18 kilometers long, 1.8 kilometers wide. And here's Tel el-Rotab, which was an enormous fortress in the Ramesside times. There may be smaller fortresses also further in the east, but they have not been found. But this was a major fortress of the Ramessides, and in the time also when of the sojourn to Egypt by the Proto-Israelites, most probably. We will immediately talk more about it. But this enormous lake was fed by Nile branches from time to time, and so it was an overflow lake. Well, this Wadi Tumilat is a very interesting place because there are toponyms, Semitic toponyms in the Wadi Tumilat, even used by the Egyptians, by the Egyptian scribes. And such toponyms develop only if there is a Semitic-speaking population. And these toponyms we know only from Ramesside period. And this is most interesting. Among the toponyms, besides Jeku could be an older toponym, perhaps originating already in the Hyksos period, but it means it was identified with Sukkot, which are temporary shelters used by semi-nomads, even until our days at the eastern edge of Egypt. Then we have Brechot, which means the lake or the lakes, not the ponds, as translated by Egyptologists. In Arabic, Birkat is more appropriate meaning. Then Seger means the enceinte, the enclosure wall, mainly of fortresses. Then Gezem, which Sarah Israelite Groll from the Hebrew University identified with Goshen, with the biblical land of Goshen, and this is very likely the right explanation. And this is mentioned, is tied in the text together with a lake where storms developed enormous waves. This can only be a very big lake, and we have this lake. Besides that, there are other Semitic toponyms in the northern Sinai, like Migdol or the Meketer, which is a tower, means tower. Jaro is the frontier fortress. Jaro is not safely identified as a Semitic toponym, but the others they are all Semitic toponyms. Anyway, this is a kind of Sukkot, a temporary shelter which nomads still use in the northern Sinai. This photograph is from my colleague Hoffmeier, who worked in this region. But very important for us is the Papyrus Anastasis 6, which dates to the time of Seti II. So late, very late in the 13th century BC. And it mentions that a troop of Shosu beduins from Edom asked the Egyptian authorities to move in, and the Egyptian authorities allowed them to move into the Wadi Tumilat, and they were allowed to move until the lakes of Pitom, which can only be here near the fortress of Teleretaba, which can be identified with Pithom, as you will see immediately. And it was called, I mean, the Bir Kavot, I mean, the lakes of Pithom. And where you have Semitic toponyms, they only develop if Semitic-speaking people live there, and in the Ramesside period. And this is very exciting. And also exciting is the date. Until now, it was considered only a text which gives an illustrations how the Proto-Israelites may have moved to Egypt. But now, as we date this Exodus and Exodus much later into the 20th dynasty, this is a very hot region, especially as they came from Edom, as you will see. Anyway, here's the fortress of Teleretaba, a Ramesside fortress with a temple of Atum. Therefore, the house of Atum, Pithom, has to be identified with this place, and there is no. And here, on the pylon of this temple, which was found by Flinders Petrie, you see the Pharaoh Rameses II smiting a Shosu Bedouin, and the god Atum, who is the primeval god of Heliopolis, the sun god. He hands him the scimitar to kill the Shosu. And this also shows that this was a major route of incoming Shosu Bedouins. This is a photograph of Petrie's excavation from Teleretaba. And now this Appius Anastasi mentions as the origin of these Bedouins coming in to keep them alive. I mean, the Egyptians were generous at the time, from time to time, to keep them and their flocks alive. There was, at the end of the 13th century BCE, a beginning penury, I mean, a beginning dryness in the climate. So the first who sense these are the Bedouins, and to keep them alive and their flocks, they have to move, and they move to Egypt, which offers perennial water. And they came from Edom. Edom is a very interesting place. It's a mountainous country, a very bizarre mountainous country. Edom means red, the mountains are red sandstone. And from here they came from. It is interesting that several text places in the Bible mention that the Lord came forth from Edom. And it means that obviously in the memory, in the tradition of the Bible, this is the place where the cult of Yahweh came from. And we have some more evidence of it. In Ramesside, and also already before, in the time of Amenhotep III, they are mentioning foreign toponyms. Among the toponyms mentioned in connection with Zaire, the desert of Zaire, is Shasu of Yahu, which is identified by Raphael Givion and Manfred Bietak and many others with the tetragram, with Yahweh. So Yahweh was originally probably a toponym, and it should be found in this place, maybe in Edom, in the desert of Zaire. And when now we have this troop of Shosu Bedouins entering Wadi Tumilat at the end of the 13th century, in the time of Seti II, it is most important to have in the back of our mind that this is a place, it's a hot spot from where they came from. And we are not sure they may be Proto-Israelites or not, but at least they were, we can say they were relatives, at least. It must be a tribe which was closely related to the Proto-Israelites. Now we shall examine another stela or another evidence. It's a stela, the so-called Israel stela, because for the first time in the reign of Merneptah, who lived in the second part towards the end of the 13th century BC, he was the successor of Rameses II. After the very long reign of Rameses II, Merneptah set up a stela, a victory stela, because he had troubles, mainly with the Libyans. The Libyans tried in several raids to enter the Nile Delta, and even they were able to cover most of the Nile Delta, even the eastern Nile Delta, what we know from the victory inscription of Merneptah. Anyway, but it's called Israel stela because it's the first time that the name of Israel is mentioned on a historical source. And it mentions several toponyms. It seems that in the southern part of the Levant, which was governed by Egypt at the time, in the Egyptian province of Canaan, the wars of Merneptah against the Libyans on the opposite side of Egypt instigated the towns to rebel against the Egyptian supervision and administration in Canaan. So Merneptah, he was engaged in the 5th year against the Libyans, but he was also engaged in a campaign in Canaan. And on the stela, he mentions first Gaza, Canaan, which has to be identified with Tel Gaza, Ashkelon, Gezer, Yenoam, southeast of the Tiberias Lake. And afterwards is mentioned Israel, whereas the other places were toponyms. Israel is not a toponym. It has as a classifier the people. You see a man and a woman and the plural classifier of the plurality. So this means they were not sedentary yet, and probably Israel, the core group, was beyond the Tiberias Lake at that time in Transjordan. This is very interesting and important. Now we come to other toponyms. We talked about the Ramses and the Pithom, the two places where the children of Israel, according to the Bible, had to do enforced labor. It's interesting. I don't think that one can put aside this tradition because normally in the history of people, it is victories and important deeds that are remembered and mentioned, bragging even. And here it is a story of slavery and forced labor, which is not so famous for people to be proud of. And therefore, I believe this is a tradition which has a historical core, and we have to believe it. And also the history of Ramses and Pithom in the Eastern Delta and near the Eastern Delta, also the geography is important, an important part. Anyway, this is a map of a reconstruction of Ramesse, the Ramses town, which is mainly on top of an island of the Nile, of the easternmost Nile branch, excavated in the last 30 years by the Palaeolithic Museum Hildesheim, but also in the northern part of Avaris, excavated by us. So Ramses town covered about 600 hectares, which is 6 square kilometers. And not for at that time one of the biggest towns in the Eastern Mediterranean. And Pyramese was started to be built up by Horemheb, who constructed an enormous fortress, and he reconstructed the Temple of Seth. Before that, between Avaris and Pyramese, this was the major Egyptian military harbor known as Peru Nefer, a happy sortie, it means. And we know that that Canaanite cults continued in Peru Nefer. We know that there was a temple of Baal and temple of Astarte and of Khufu. And anyway, and also in Pyramese, these cults continued. So there was a kind of continuum after the Hyksos were defeated and were probably distributed all over the country. But this is a very important asset of us. This is a wall of Horemheb's fortress, cutting into a big palace of Thutmose III and Amenhotep II. Here we have tiles of Horemheb, and also Horemheb revived in his scarab patterns motifs from the Hyksos period. But this is are the remains of the temple of Seth, the weather god, the Egyptian storm god, in Avaris, but originating from a temple of the storm god of the Hyksos. We found this lintel of a sanctuary of Seth, Sotech Pechti, with the cartouches of Horemheb, and within this temple we found remains of a vineyard. You see, it's a pergola system. We also found in this pergola system, what is it? We found within this pergola system a wine press. Screen sharing, what is it? Yeah. This is a famous stele of 400 years, where Rameses II gives an offering to god Seth, but it is not the Egyptian god Seth, as you can see. It's the Syrian storm god, Baal Zephon, with the Syrian kilt with tassels, with the high crown of Syrian kings and gods, with the long pomon, with the crossed bands over his chest. This is Baal Zephon, originating from the Hyksos, not from the Hyksos period, from before the Hyksos period, from the time of the 14th dynasty. King Nehesi introduced or built a temple for the god Baal Zephon in Avaris. And this stele is a memory of the 400 years since the foundation of this temple until the Ramesside period. And at the same time, this god is mentioned, or is not only mentioned, he is considered as the ancestral god of this dynasty. To argue the divine origin of this dynasty, which was not of a royal origin, they claim that they originate from the god Sotech, but in reality from the Syrian storm god. And this storm god had a very long temple history at the site of Avaris. Although the stele was found at Tanis, but it was dislocated in the 21st, 22nd dynasty. And so originally it was set up at the pylon of the temple of Sotech, which was south of Pyramese. And this is a from King Nemanja of the 14th dynasty, which dates around 1700 BC, showing Nemanja he was beloved of Seth, who was, this is the Interpretatio Egyptiaca of the Syrian storm god. And he is shown here as a Levantine king with a Levantine crown. But he was, his image on this obelisk was damaged, probably at the end of the 14th dynasty, which was taken over by the Hyksos. It's another story. Anyway, we have evidence that the Syrian storm god had a cult in Avaris already in the time of the 14th dynasty, probably even before. This is a sealed cylinder of hematite, showing the Syrian storm god stepping from the mountain of Chazi to the mountain of Nani. The Chazi is the northern mountain, Jebel Akra in Syria, and Nani is the Amanus mountain. He is the storm god of Syria. He's the overlord of the sea, the vindicator of the sea. He had subdued the sea, which is represented here as a snake. The snake Yam is also a god on the podest, but at the same time he's the patron of the sailors. Behind him is the weather bull, but the cryptic style is influenced by Egyptian art, according to Edith Porada, who was perhaps the best expert in Syrian cryptic art, late Edith Porada. Anyway, we found a temple from the 14th dynasty, a broad-room temple, one of the biggest in the Levant. Here is an altar. Here's another temple, a bent axis temple. And while broad-room temples are temples considered for male gods in the Levant, bent axis temples are considered for female gods, for goddesses. So we have here a divine couple, but beside here is another temple, an Egyptian type of temple. We have reason enough to think that this was a temple of Seth, or better to say, of the Syrian storm god, which fits very well to a harbor town, because Avaris was a harbor town from its very beginning, from the 12th dynasty onwards. It was a harbor town, and to build a temple for the patron of the sailors and the overlord of the sea is only very logic. Besides, his consort may have been, in this case, Asherah. Asherah had also the title Mistress of the Sea, or the Asherah who walks on the sea. Very meaningful divinities for a harbor town. Anyway, this is a map of Pyramese of Gantir, excavated, as I said, by the Pelizios Museum Hildesheim in 30 years, but the excavations are now continued again by the same institution. And was an enormous town. And of course, they need soldiers, they needed workmen. If you look at the building activity, 600 hectares were constructed in a short time, with palaces, with living quarters, with official kiosks of receiving other people, with temples, from where to take the workmen. And Rameses, the Rameses town was already started by Horemheb and later by Seti I, the father of Rameses II, as we can see from the tiles, faience tiles, which once embellished the walls of the palace of Pyramese, found by the Egyptian Antiquities Service at Gantir in the 20s, in the late 20s. Anyway, it's an enormous site with, for instance, a stable for horses, for 500 horses from the time of the 20th dynasty, but truly it has a predecessor, an older predecessor from the time of the 19th dynasty. You see how the horses were fettered on these stones, and they had even toilets, the horses, so that they kept healthy in their hoofs, because if they stand in their urine, it is a danger that they would get diseases in their hoofs. Also, they excavated a workshop for a military workshop, where they found fittings for chariots of alabaster, of metal, swords, sophisticated arrowheads. All this was found south of the palace. The horse stables are here, and there were also, our team made a survey of Gantir with probing with my colleague Joseph Dorner, found several canals. So you have to imagine a kind of a town which had canals where the main traffic was diverted. Also here an artificial lake in front of the temple of Amun-Re-Harach, the Aton. Well, the site was situated here, and if you think of an exodus from here, people could only walk northwards to the Sinai, and if they wanted to avoid the frontier fortresses, they had to wade through the Balach lakes, which were much bigger at that time because they were fed by the easternmost Nile branch. But what I wanted to say is that at the end of the 20th dynasty, the easternmost Nile branch, which issued here in the Mediterranean, was blocked by sediments. In the 20th dynasty, the annual dredging of the Nile branches didn't function anymore. There was no authority. So the Nile branches were blocked. The waters were diverted to the next Nile branch, the Tanitic Nile branch, via this canal. But Rameses couldn't be anymore a harbor. It was too far away from the sea. So therefore, they moved the capital to Talis, the 21st and 22nd dynasty in the 11th century BC. They moved to Talis and also to Bubastis. And in order to build the new residences, they took all the stone monuments from Rameses to Tanis to build the new temples and to Bubastis. So these were the two capitals of the Libyan dynasties. So therefore you find today in Tanis and in Bubastis stone monuments of the 19th dynasty, but also older stone monuments which were originally in Avaris. This famous Hyksos sphinxes, which date, however, to the 12th dynasty, for example. And what remained behind in some cases were feet and pedestals of colossal statues, which were broken off during the transportation and taking off the statues into Tanis. Anyway, in the 21st, 22nd dynasties, in the 11th and 10th century BCE, the stones were transported to Tanis and to Bubastis. And this caused, much later, in the 4th and 3rd century BC, that in Tanis they believed, because there were statues of priests of the gods of Rameses of Rameses, because they found these titles in much older statuary. So cults were established independently in Tanis for the gods of Rameses, and in Bubastis also there were established priests and cults for the gods of Pyramese and for Ramses II as well. And this is the reason why in the exilic period, Jewish exiles trying to find the vestiges of their ancestors in Egypt believed, I mean, they had to follow what the Egyptians believed at the time. Pyramese was at that time already 700 years abandoned, and therefore it was forgotten where it was. In Tanis, they believed here was Pyramese. In Bubastis, they believed nearby, maybe Tel el-Kebir or maybe at Piton was Pyramese. Anyway, cults, secondary cults on the gods of Ramses and of the gods of Ramses of Pyramese developed independently in Tanis and in Bubastis in the 4th and the 3rd millennium BC, century BC, in the time of the 30th and the 30th dynasty, when Egypt started to become very self-conscious, and again in the Ptolemaic period in the 3rd century BC. Now we will deal with the question, when could have happened the Exodus? Well, today we don't believe in one Exodus. We think there were several Exoduses, at least 2. One option is in the time, I mean, you have to imagine that a larger group of people, let us say several hundred people, could leave Egypt only in times when the border was not strictly supervised. Otherwise, they would have been stopped. The first opportunity appeared in the transition period of the 19th to the 20th dynasty. There were at least 4 or 5 years where in Egypt there was turmoil. There were parties who fought each other. One of the main contenders for the kingship was the general Seth Nachte. In his stela in Elephantine, he mentions that he was able to overcome his adversaries, among them a Syrian with the name Irsu, who may have been a model for Joseph, for the Joseph story. Anyway, Sednacht was able to expel them. The foreigners fled, but he mentions that they were bribed by Egyptians, his opponents, with silver and gold. Now it's interesting, in there are at least one, if not 2, parts in the Bible, in the book of Exodus, where it is mentioned that the Israelites took silver and gold from the Egyptians when they left. It was always thought the Egyptians were glad that they left and paid them to leave, but this is illogical, because why should they afterwards try to stop them of leaving? Anyway, I think this could be an option, a period of leaving, for instance, Pyramese. But till now, the text of the Exodus combines the Exodus mentioning Ramses and Piton. But the 2 are apart and separated not only by the Nile, but they are also separated by the Bahr el-Baga drainage system. It was an enormous overflow lake, natural overflow lake, which protected Egypt from the east. So in order to go from Pyramese to Piton, they would have to go first south and then eastwards. Very unlikely. I think we can claim there was a second Exodus from Piton. The text also starts the Exodus from Piton, another text. Message started from Piton. When could this have happened? Well, in the time of Ramses III, so relatively early in the 12th century BC, sea people conquered parts of the Egyptian province of Canaan. Probably in the 5th year of Rameses III, they entered Canaan, coastal Canaan, and established bridgeheads in what later became the Pentapolis or Philistia, but other sea people, the Checar in Dor, the Sherden in the Gulf of Akko. So bridgeheads were established, and they were lost for Egypt. Egypt was only able to keep up its province in the Jordan Valley and in the southern part of Canaan. But these bridgeheads were lost forever. And from these bridgeheads, the Philistines and other sea people tried to assault Egypt by land and by sea. They must have stayed already for some time in this land because they came with wagons or by land. From where do sea people have wagons? They produced them here. So they entered Egypt by land, but also by sea, by a two-pronged approach. By sea, they entered along the Pelusiac branch of the Nile, but they stopped here. They were stopped here at the mouth of the Nile, but they were able to destroy frontier fortresses already, as Jim Hoffmeier was able to prove. But they also entered by land, but the land and sea battle, which is illustrated at the northern wall of Medinet Habu, happened nearly at the same place. Well, Rameses III was victorious, but I don't know when, but either before the approach of the sea people or afterwards. He fortified the frontier fortresses. He fortified one of the biggest frontier fortresses, which was Tel el-Rotabe in the Wadi Tumilat. The walls were doubled. This site is excavated now. I mean, it was found by Petrie. Originally, it was excavated now, or is excavated now by a Polish Slovak expedition. And they found and could date also the temple and the enclosure walls. And they were able to identify the enlargement of the enclosure wall to 20 meters diameter. You have to imagine, it's an enormous enclosure wall. And this means that Ramses II, the third, was, here you see the enclosure wall, the enormous size of the enclosure wall of Ramses III. This happened probably before or after the Sea People invasion, because maybe he was afraid of a second attempt. This is an aerial photograph of the entrance of the fortress, the western entrance of the fortress. You can see how enormous these towers are. So it's an enormous fortress. But there were other fortresses. Another one was found by Shafik Farid in the, I think it was in the 50s at Kolzum, which is a site just north of, a little bit north of Suez, and they had approach to the Red Sea from there. It's an enormous fortress also. It's smaller than Wadi Tumilat, but it's more than 100 meters, 200 cubits by 200 cubits, an enormous fortress. And I think there were more fortresses like that, which were, however, destroyed during the activity of building the Suez Canal in the 19th century. Anyway, if you try, from where did he have the workmen to build such enormous fortresses? I mean, especially the one in the Wadi Tumilat. And we learned that in the Wadi Tumilat lived sedentary nomads. Well, try today to force nomads to build such enormous fortresses. I think they would say Masalama and would disappear overnight. And this could only happen in the turmoil years when the sea people invaded Egypt. And this is a second option when the Exodus could have happened. Well, with this, I finish my account. Again, the north and south theory of the Exodus were produced by the using Pyramese as a quarry in the 21st, 22nd dynasties. Therefore, you have in the late period, in Tanis and Bubastis, secondary cults of the gods of Pyramese. And following these secondary cults, the theories of the northern and the southern Exodus, but in reality, the southern Exodus may have happened as a separate Exodus, but surely an Exodus has happened from Pyramese. And if you move from Pyramese northwards, you are obliged to move between the Pelusiac branch and the Bahr el-Baga drainage system until you have to leave the track, the Horus Road, and pass the many frontier fortresses. And if you want to avoid this, you have to wade through the Balach lakes. And I think the Balach lake is the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, Pachufi in ancient Egyptian. It's an Egyptian name, which was taken over by the early Israelites. And it's another proof that they had a good idea about the geography or memory. And memory was kept alive in the verbal transmission. The Pachufi is also mentioned in the Onomasticon Amenope between Tanis and Ramses. And it is exactly between Tanis or near Tanis and Ramses. So Pachufi is another biblical toponym. Besides the Horus Road, or the way of the Philistines, it leads to the Philistia. And this is also the road where the Philistines came on the land route. All this shows that the biblical tradition has kept quite a good memory of the geographical situation of the eastern border of Egypt. And it cannot be argued that this is an invention from the Persian period or before, slightly before the Persian period, as many of our colleagues now think, because Pyramese is not mentioned in any document between the 20th dynasty and the third millennium, the fourth and the third century BC, with the secondary cults of Pyramese. Nothing in between. So therefore, to mention the town of Ramses in the time of the Persian period or in the exilic period is very unlikely. They have kept a relatively good memory on the eastern border of Egypt. And therefore, I think that a core of the Exodus is correct. It wasn't thousands of people. It were perhaps some hundreds of people maximum. And these some hundred people were able to bring with them the story of the Exodus. And because of their political importance in the future of the ethnogenesis of Israel, became suddenly a saga of importance for the history of ancient Israel. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bietak. I really enjoyed in your lectures, so it was really Interesting. So thank you. Do you have a few minutes for questions, maybe?
Yes, please.
Okay. I have a question. Would you identify Mount Sinai as a traditional site?
Well, there are several sites. You know, you have the mentioning of the Mount Sinai. You have the mentioning of the mountain of Horeb. There are two mountains, and later merge other mountains also in the story. We don't know really where the mountain of. I mean, I don't think that the mountain of Sinai where the transition localizes it was the real mountain of Sinai. However, it may have been one of the many mountains where the proto-Israelites believed God resides. It is a kind of fiction of the storm god who lives on the mountain, on several mountains, which was transferred to the god of the Israelites. And you have, besides, I mean, if you look at the itinerary, it's far too long till they arrived. It's months till they arrived at the foot of the mountain of Sinai. So this must be just quite a distance away. But to say something about what is believed today, I mean, by general public to be the mountain of Sinai, there could have been also a sanctuary of nomads, which was kept up much later by Proto-Arabic nomads, because there is a passage in the book of Exodus where they ask the Pharaoh to allow them to go 3 days to a sanctuary to honor Yahweh, or the God, the Lord. And I mean, 3 days is also a little bit fast, but it is, you can reach in some days the mountain of what is today the Sinai. And I think this is one tradition, but surely there were several mountains of Sinai. Therefore, you have the many names.
Okay, that's reasonable. Thank you. Another question. Does, at the most, Egyptologists believe in some form of historical exodus, like you?
I think so, yes, of course. Kenneth Kitchen was considered as a fundamentalist, but Kenneth Kitchen was an excellent scholar, and I wouldn't believe in everything what he wrote, but Kenneth Kitchen was a very keen scholar, or is a very keen, still alive, and he wrote a book on the Old Testament, and there were other Egyptologists who wrote about the Exodus and about Moses, I mean, among them Jan Assmann. So there are Egyptologists who believe in the historicity of the Exodus and the historicity perhaps of Moses, because also the name of Moses is interesting. It means it's a short form of a theophoric name. As you know, theophoric names were very common in ancient Egypt, like Tutmose, which means the god Tot is born, or Ramose, god Re is born, or Set Mose, Set is born. And if you shorten this, you only call him Mose. Like in Arabic, you call many Abdu, is despite they have a much, the name is the slave of, Abdul Hakim, Abdul Karim, Abdul Nebi, and so on and so on. They are just shortened, called Abdu. And so the name Moses is an Egyptian name, a shortened theophoric name. The shortened theophoric name is even mentioned on a stela. We have a stela, the so-called, a stela which originates surely from Rameses, and on this stela, a soldier has the name Mesu. It's the same name like Moses.
Thank you. So do you believe in a historical person like some leader, Moses?
It is, yes, it could be, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I would not turn it down.
Yeah, thank you. Can you comment on Berlin's pedestal? Does that mention Israel name or not?
You mean it's a pedestal in the Museum of Berlin?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is it is a reconstruction by Manfred Bietak and also by my colleague, whom I highly, admire, Wolfgang Zwickle. But I think this is not a proof. The stela is from, the pedestal is from Ramesside period, if I remember correctly. But it is not a proof of Israel.
Okay, thank you. Do you see any thematical parallels between Ipuwer Papyrus and Exodus story?
Well, I think the EXODOI, the sojourn to Egypt, is at least well illustrated in the Papyrus Anastasis 6.
Okay. Next, about Shasu of Yahu, is it a shortcut of capital city or more likely shortcut of deity like Yahweh? What do you think?
Not of a city, of a toponym. A toponym must not be a city. It could be a mountain. It could be a region. I think perhaps originally it was a place name. But I wouldn't. It could be that the place name has something to do with a specific god. I don't know. This is very difficult to answer. Anyway, it is known as a place name. And it is possible that it was a place name where the Yahweh cult started earliest. And we know that the Yahweh cult has not necessarily been started by the Proto-Israelites. We know that the Midianites were the priests of Yahweh. The father-in-law of Moses, according to the book of Exodus, and Genesis and Exodus. Jethro, he was the high priest of Yahweh, and he was a Midianite. He was not an Israelite.
Interesting. Thank you. So are those people, Shasu of Yahu, are they coming to Egypt in the time of Amenhotep III, I believe you said, or maybe coming out of Egypt? Do you know answer?
No, they tried to enter Egypt. We know from the Seti, the first campaign, in his first year, it was against the Shosu, who tried to enter Egypt via the Horus Road, via the fortresses along the Horus Road. But the name is known already before. From the 18th dynasty, perhaps already much earlier. But there is even, I think, one mention in the Old Kingdom, in the 6th dynasty. But if they were the same Shosu in the New Kingdom, nobody knows. Anyway, we know that Amenhotep II made raids against the Shosu and brought many of them back as prisoners of war.
Okay, thank you. Can you comment departure of Semites from Avaris, I believe in time of Rameses II? Some scholars argue that it is evidence for Exodus. So how you comment that?
No, there's no proof that an Exodus in the time of Rameses II. I think it's highly unlikely. I think we have to stick with the proof. Firstly, the the Iron Age culture, which is identified with the emergence of the early Israelites, is, starts only with the end of the around 1200 BC, maybe slightly before. This is quite some time after Ramses II. And the earliest mentioning, as I mentioned, is from the time of Merneptah, from the 6th year of Merneptah, or fifth year of Merneptah, 6th year of Merneptah. Anyway, there is no proof that the Israelites were in Egypt in the time of Ramses II. I could not, surely ancestors of them entered Egypt, left Egypt via the Wadi Tumilat, but this is even likely. But as I mentioned before, the ethnogenesis of the Israelites was not terminated before the 11th century, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
12th century, sorry, not before the 12th century.
Thank you. Can you comment on Merneptah Stele, because it is in, I believe, 13th century, right?
It's late.
Yes. Okay, so we have mentioned Israel. So 20th dynasty is later than Merneptah Stele. So how you harmonize that with Exodus?
Yeah, I mentioned already that in the time of Merneptah, the Israelites are known to the Egyptians as a tribe or as people without, who were not sedentary, obviously, because otherwise they would have added a toponym with the mentioning of the name. But what we also have to take into our mind that not all Israelites went to Egypt, and not, it was only a relatively small group who were in Egypt, and the major part probably stayed there, and it was only a small group which left Egypt in different instances, like I tried to explain with the time of Setnacht, in the time of Ramses III. And another matter which I forgot, in the book of Exodus, after the settlement in Canaan of the Israelites, we don't know Egyptians are mentioned. And the Egyptians kept up Canaan as a province until Ramses the fourth, and perhaps even until Ramses VI. Unthinkable that a group of migrant nomads could enter the province of Canaan without mentioning Egyptians. The Egyptians were in control, particularly of the Jordan Valley. They lost the control of the coast, but they controlled the Jordan Valley and the Jezreel Valley. So entering Canaan without encountering Egyptians is unthinkable. And they are not mentioned. So this means this must have happened after Egypt withdrew from Canaan, after Ramses IV, something like that.
Okay, that makes sense. So can you comment on a view of Dr. Douglas Petrovich? Maybe you know that theory about Amenhotep II and maybe Thutmose III. Is there any departure of Avaris from that time or something?
I think this is a very, how shall I say, a theory which cannot be. It is true that obviously during or after Amenhotep II, Avaris was abandoned for some time. Our theory is that probably an epidemic broke out at that time, and therefore, the town of Peronefa was abandoned. because also peaceful period started with Thutmose IV. So Peronefer was not in need so much, and it wasn't needed again under Horemheb. Therefore, Horemheb started to build again at Peronefer. But probably already Amenhotep III started to build the fortress already, because we know from a statue of Amenhotep, son of Apu, who was a sage in the time, and a very high official in the time of Amenhotep III. He got the order of the king to fortify the mouths of the Nile, the estuaries of the Nile, against sea robbers, against pirates who entered the estuaries of the Nile and raided villages. And therefore, this high official got the order to fortify the estuaries of the Nile branches. And there we have some evidence that there is a fortress older than the fortress of than Horemheb's fortress. And I think this could be the fortress of Amenhotep III, from the time of Amenhotep III, built under the order of Amenhotep, son of Hapu.
Is only palace abandoned or entire?
Yes, it was abandoned. The palace was abandoned, but we have no proof. This is Petrovich. This is too speculative to be defended as a theory.
Okay, thank you. I have just two little questions, if you have time more. Are some proto-Israelites maybe called Habiru or maybe Hyksos by some people? So is that?
Oh, Hyksos, surely not.
No.
The Hyksos have nothing to do with the Israelites.
Okay.
They are several hundred years before the appearance of the Israelites.
Okay.
And Habiru, yes, there is there's idea that the Habiru, which were tribes, but perhaps not a specific ethnicon. They were also partly people who fled the towns in Canaan in order not to be taxed, and they made their living by robbing, raiding towns or raiding villages. These were the Habiru. A part of them may have been tribes, but a part of the Habiru were marauders. Anyway, it's believed that the expression Habiru comes from the Apiru, which were workmen in Egypt, mostly of foreign origin. It is debated if the Habiru and Apiru were the same, but it is possible. So some changes in the terminology happened, and therefore it is the idea that the Hebrew, then the term Hebrew, came from the Habirus. But again, I'm not an Old Testament scholar, and I cannot expand on these calculations.
Okay, thank you very much. And last question, can you comment about Jacob Har seal? Does that have any connection with Jacob in Old Testament?
Well, names can be alive for thousands of years. Jacob is still known nowadays.
Yeah.
So if a Hyksos or a predecessor of the Hyksos has the name Jacob Har, it doesn't mean that he has something to do with, or that he was a proto-Israelite. I have to refute this, and so it is very unlikely. And names have a very long life. Many names have a very, very long life, and to go from one population to the next to come.
What about Joseph identifying with Sasobek? I believe Petrovich also said that. Can you comment that shortly?
No, sorry.
No.
Sorry.
Okay.
This is too speculative.
Okay.
What I believe, what is possible is, I mean, that this vizier-like person with the name Irsu in the time before Setnach took over the reign of Egypt, was of Western Asiatic origin, that he could be a model for the story of Joseph. Yes.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor. At the end, can you just comment how do you think, because I'm a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, so what do you think about, I wonder, Adventist archaeologists like Siegfried Horn, William Shea, Michael Hazel, Randall Yanker? Do you know their work and how you see them as archaeologists?
Yes, no, surely they are they have high merits, and of course I follow their publications, and there are many others now which are on vogue. And not always, for instance, my colleague Israel Finkelstein, who wrote a lot about Exodus also, with a very different idea. He refutes, he thinks that the Exodus story was invented in the Persian period. And also Donald Redford from the State University of Philadelphia thinks in this way. But I think I have put forward reasons enough with the geography in the time of and topography of the time of the 19th dynasty and 20th dynasty, that we could be more, I mean, that we could imagine that the story developed much before that time. I mean, in the Rameside period.
Okay, that's all from me. And thank you, Professor. It was really inspiring. I really love your work, and you're, for me, best archaeologist I know. So thank you very much. And it was a pleasure.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.